it right out in front of them real quick, they're less attentive at that point. I mean, they want more. They say, wait, is that all I got to make my decision? So I think there's a balancing act there between putting as much information as you can on, not necessarily losing the jury, but not being so brief that they miss the point and they're disappointed.
Yeah, Judge Fernand Rucker, Matt makes a great point, but this is a death penalty case, as we pointed. And my experience with death penalty cases is that the jury wants to be certain, not just beyond a reasonable, they really want certainty that the person on trial that they're going to consider for the death penalty is the one who did it. And sometimes they'll, as you know, they'll say, well, I'll vote guilty, but, we'll go to this death penalty. I'll listen, but I'm not inclined to do it. And, we've heard stories about that. But at this point, this witness is talking about reproducibility for a scientific, not experiment, but he did say it was a science project. But how can he reproduce something if he doesn't have the weapon that shot the cartridges? Judge?
Yeah. Well, certainly if we were looking for a conviction solely on this witness's testimony, I don't know that the state would be able to produce that. But what we know is that none of these witnesses are in isolation. It's added on testimony and added on testimony. And so this testimony of this witness will be added to the other witnesses who they do present, who can provide the factual basis for what this witness is providing from a technical and scientific basis.
Very interesting. We're getting two viewpoints that says, well, maybe this witness is not as important in of itself as his testimony as he will be as just a little piece in that puzzle. So that's why we stay tuned to the whole prosecutor's case, and we'll do that, and we'll continue on our coverage on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
Why did it go to one ear? How long of a break? Getting groggy with young gravy, or detective makes mistakes. Yo, okay, we're gonna watch this, chat. This looks like it could be lit.
Pasco County 911. This guy was run over by a truck. The guy threw it in reverse and backed over him about 20 miles an hour. He's unconscious. His scalp peeled clear back from his skull.
Oh my god.
Bleeding real bad. Is he breathing? He's breathing, yes ma'am. Okay.
Paramedics arrive and find the victim is still alive. He is rushed to the hospital with massive injuries. Deputies transport the driver of the truck to the sheriff's office for questioning.
What the fuck?
This here is Michael Martinez.
The victim, 30-year-old Michael Martinez, grew up in the same neighborhood where he was run over. He worked in construction and had a close relationship with his family.
Michael had family that loved him. He had a sense of humor. He enjoyed the holidays.
Michael also had some trouble with the law.
He was no angel. He made mistakes. I've gone rounds with Michael, but it didn't stop me from fighting for him to get a little justice.
The driver of the truck is 39-year-old Nathan Robbins, a neighbor and friend of Michael.
Looks like a friendly gentleman, doesn't he?
Robbins' rap sheet is extensive. Robbins had crimes ranging from burglary, theft. He had some traffic violations. I'm not sure there's a time in Nathan Robbins' life where he was not in trouble.
Before Porter can interview Nathan, he learns from the hospital doctors could not save Michael's life. The case is now officially a homicide.
Nathan didn't know that Michael was dead. And I felt that that could be an advantage.
The good news is he's at the hospital getting work done.
There's no
Nathan
way.
Robbins wasn't going to ask me.
Bullshit. That's so stupid. Uh. Playing right now.
Face the death penalty, but the prosecution has to present a case getting him to be the person who is the trigger person. And on the stand right now, in their attempts to do that, they have the firearms examiner, George Bello, who is explaining how close, or is about to explain how close the muzzle of that gun was to the two decedents to establish that it was the person in the car, Y and W. Melly, who had to be the shooter. Let's go into court. Let's listen and see how close he gets.
All of that does play a factor in your distance determination.
Yes, he's a fucking psycho.
Reproduce it, and which part of the challenge of distance determinations is we have to try to reproduce whatever we're seeing. That's the only way we're going to be able to know what that distance is if we can actually physically reproduce it.
Back in it.
If you have a 4-inch barrel versus a 7 or
Oh, this is exciting.
how does that change the shape of the flower or the cone as it travels?
Yeah,
Well,
this is
a
exciting.
few different things. So the cloud itself is going to come out of the barrel at a higher velocity the longer the barrel is. It's also coming out with less powder because a lot of that powder has been consumed inside of the barrel. And so two things are going to change there in that the width of this cone becomes narrower further out. And so if you don't have the correct firearm, you're not actually reproducing that pattern.
Let me make sure I'm clear. The width
Sure.
becomes narrower farther out on a longer barrel.
What?
Okay.
Correct. So the shorter the barrel, the wider that the cone becomes at a shorter distance. And the higher the density of the particles.
Oh my god, we just listened to all of this. Why are they running it back?
Consumed during that combustion, and so less particles.
Like, nah, please no.
Okay, so Mr.
None of us want to hear all of it again.
For whatever reason, don't have the firearm that was used in whatever distance determination you're trying to recreate. Could you use a brand new, same make, same model, same caliber firearm to do this determination?
Well, in the absence of a firearm, I don't.
How do you know what the gun is?
Was used.
5 head, bro. This guy's a genius. I love it.
Let's say all the fire characteristics say it's a Glock.
So,
Well,
I mean, if we don't know what kind of car the person was driving,
19
is there a way that we could figure out what type of car the person was driving?
all of those different models.
And this guy answers with,
Caliber.
no, without knowing what type of car the person was driving, because there's a lot of different cars, idiot. It basically summarizes his answer.
That it was in fact a particular Glock 17. I have no way of being able to
Politely, he's basically just saying, you know.
I don't know what the make and model is of the firearm.
Is there any way you can account for any aftermarket alterations to a firearm?
Not without identifying the firearm first.
And could you explain to ladies and aftermarket, post-manufacturer alterations are possible on a .40 caliber handgun.
I swear, they already played all that.
I mean, you can essentially get down to the point where you've created your own new firearm. You can replace firing pins, you can replace extractors, you can replace ejectors, you can replace the slide, you can replace barrels. You can replace almost every portion of that firearm and still have what they would technically call the same firearm based on the serial number. So the serial number is imparted on the frame, and so long as you have the same frame, you technically have the same firearm.
The death of Reddit.
Good evening, everyone. It's with a heavy heart that I have to deliver some tragic news that I'm sure you've already seen and have probably spent the better part of your afternoon crying about. Reddit is currently down. The narwhal is not baconing today, my friends. This is not a wholesome Chungus moment. Reddit is offline, and there's good reason for it. Many of you probably saw over the last week or so that there was an organized protest with most of the subreddits on the platform about API changes, and maybe there's
I never heard about this.
Jumbo, scary, frightening big words and acronyms that you didn't even bother to look into.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm going to do here is break down the situation on why there was a Reddit strike in the first place and what the future could hold for all the Reddit mods that are now stranded without a home to go back to or a place, a domain to rule over. Now,
Go to
I
Discord.
joke about the situation, but Reddit is legitimately one of the top 10 most visited sites in the world, so the fact that it's down right now due to this strike is actually really impressive. Like,
Oh, it's a big fucking deal. It absolutely is. Like, people were really pissed off about this. It's not like, because usually, I mean, like, there have been other protests where, like, people change their banner or something like that, but it doesn't really matter. But, like, here's what my opinion on this is. It's not going to matter if everybody just turns it back on in 2 days. Like, if the people were just, like, straight up, we aren't going to use this website anymore, and we're going to private everything until this is changed, then it will matter. But, like, think about if you run Reddit. Oh, okay, so we don't get traffic for 2 days, but then we can just do whatever we want. Isn't that, like, a very easy decision to make? I would say it is. It needs to keep going. It needs to keep going indefinitely.
genuinely surprising how much the community came together in order to protest the Reddit changes. So, what sparked this?
I have a weird
this
pain in my underarm.
Redditors. It was a change
Death.
to how Reddit was going to be conducting business. They did their best EA impression here and got very greedy.
Their
So they
best
decided they were
EA
gonna
impression.
for API access, and they were charging a fucking fat load of money for it too.
Mic
API
check.
access allows things like third-party apps to exist. It needs the API access to function, and Reddit was going to begin charging for that access. So the biggest one is called Apollo, and it helps users read Reddit threads. It's something many power users were familiar with, but something I didn't know about until recently.
Yeah, I don't
and
use that.
according to the developer of Apollo, it would cost nearly $20 million annually under this new pricing model.
Jesus.
Which is a ton of pickles. That's far beyond the realm of possibility for pretty much any third-party developer. So, effectively, Reddit was killing third-party apps because nobody could afford to pay the API fee for their services.
Yeah, it's
anymore.
insane.
And it didn't just affect third-party apps; it also affected mod tools, as I understand it as well.
That's what
so
I've
this
heard
new
too.
pricing scheme, fresh out of the brain of Mr. Krabs, shaking everyone down for their lunch money, had a large set of consequences that effectively shut off a lot of what people were used to, and it wasn't something that the community was thrilled about. This was not a policy change that was getting a lot of updates. So
No, it wasn't. I don't think anybody wanted this except for the people that are making money off of it. That's it. Like, yeah, it's literally that simple. There's nothing more complicated than that. That's it.
the community, as well as a lot of the biggest subreddit mods, as well as just the biggest subreddits in general, came together and decided that they were going to do a strike, a Reddit blackout, where they're going to be taking their subreddits private, meaning you can't access them anymore. Basically just shutting them down temporarily.
Like, if I was Reddit and, like, the subreddit, like, this is what I would do, is I would just make it so you can't private a subreddit. I would just do that. If people are complaining about
Big
it,
move.
just make it where you
Wrecked.
can't private the subreddit and problem solved. But the truth is that people will eventually turn on the add-on, on the API developers and the add-on developers. They will turn on them because the users don't really care about the add-ons. Most people that use Reddit probably don't use third-party tools. So these problems are
Oh, that's a long
problems that
video.
are affecting.
Welcome everyone to Law and Crime Daily. I'm Brian.
Law Crime Daily, day 2 of One W Millie. No.
Brought long periods of testimony from crime scene investigators. The prosecution wants to show the jury why they believe Melly was the shooter inside an SUV back in October of 2018.
2018.
Melly,
Christ.
whose given name is Jamel Demons, is accused of killing 2 men he called his friends. In October of 2018, Melly's best friend, Cortland Henry, showed up at a Miami hospital claiming his friends were caught in a drive-by shooting and were bleeding out in the car. Anthony Williams and Christopher Thomas had multiple gunshot wounds and were pronounced dead. Henry told officers they were shot at while leaving a recording studio. But when police got there, they said there was no evidence that a drive-by had occurred. Investigators determined the victims were shot by someone in the car, and surveillance showed 4 men inside, including Melly. Police arrested Melly and Henry on 2 counts of first-degree murder each. They are being tried separately and have both pled not guilty. The prosecutor walked one investigator through the photos he took of the Jeep where Thomas and Williams were killed. We want to warn you, some of the photos do show blood inside the SUV.
That is the area between the front passenger seat and the...
Go watch the Cuff Boy video.
Host, former
Picture.
trial attorney Terry Austin.
They're pretty
Our
graphic.
Special guest, former homicide prosecutor Bernardo Villalona. Terry, a lot of today's testimony may have seemed really dry, not just to some of our viewers, but probably some of us as well. But why is it necessary to go through each and every piece of evidence in so much detail?
Well, because under the federal rules of evidence, you have to make sure that
I think I'm gonna stream golf, bro. We just got to get it set up. There's a couple things that have to happen. A, Whips has to like be here. B, I think I have to hire a videographer because I want it to be. I don't want it to just be like a camera. You know what I'm saying? I want it to be like a 4K. I want it to look really good if I do it, right? So we need like this whole thing set up. We're probably gonna have to get like a videographer, right? And then, it's like, I think I'm gonna have to get the course permission, and I don't know what that's gonna look like. Yeah. Long story short, I think I want to do that. I just want to say, chat, big W in chat for all these gifted members, bro. I haven't even like read. I'm still catching up with donos. I haven't even read like the members at all yet. But I see there's a ton of new members coming in and a ton of gifted members. And just, I appreciate you all, man, for real. I know I haven't even read it yet at all. Like in this sentence that I'm saying, I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There were 5 new members in that moment. You know what I'm saying? I appreciate you guys, man. Thank you. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry I can't like read them all. There's a lot of alerts flying, but I'm sorry I can't like read them all. There's a lot of alerts flying, but I want you just I'm
Welcome to the video. We joke, we laugh, no holding back. I seldom do a ditty though. I have some ideas that are just too far, or would leave you scarred. So a relatively witty flow's the only place for it. To be honest, guys, I've been stuck in a cage. I want freedom to fly. Cause when I send a hamster up the tube at the bank to make myself laugh, it gets demonetized. Pink eye, 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 pink. So I'm traveling the world, sleeping at the West End. At the beach, I bit a shark and left it with the peg fin. Interesting day at the park, there's kids playing. I'm just laying, definitely an investment. Especially with my best friend playing my harp. But that's when this little kid, thinking he's smart, runs up and says, "Hey, my centipede's pregnant." Punches my balls and kicks me in my left shin. His parents saw it all. There better be a lesson, a spanking to start. But they kiss him on the cheek. And here's your benefits and pension. I hate my heart. It's aching. I'm raging. I'm naked. Wait, what am I saying? I'm sorry. I get to be a gentleman. Walk on over like, how do you do? Pleasantly impress them out of the blue.
Wild.
This tiny robot mouse can finish this maze in just 6 seconds. Every year around the world, people compete in the oldest robotics race. The goal is simple: get to the end of the maze as fast as possible.
The person who came second lost by 20 milliseconds.
But competition has grown fierce.
When somebody saw my design, they said, "You're crazy."
Why is there so much tension? What's riding on it? Oh. Honor?
Honor?
This video was sponsored by Onshape. In 1952, mathematician Claude Shannon constructed an electronic mouse named Theseus that could solve a maze. The trick to making the mouse intelligent was hidden in a computer built into the maze itself, made of telephone relay switches. The mouse was just a magnet on wheels, essentially, following an electromagnet controlled by the position of the relay switches.
He is now exploring the maze using a rather involved strategy of trial and error. As he finds the correct path, he registers the information in his memory. Later, I can put him down in any part of the maze that he's already explored, and he'll be able to go directly to the goal without making a single false turn.
Theseus is often referred to as one of the first examples of machine learning. A director at Google recently said that it inspired the whole field of AI. 25 years later, editors at the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, or IEEE, caught wind of a contest for electronic mice, or Le Mouse Electronique, as they had heard. They were ecstatic. Were these the successors to Theseus? But something had been lost in translation. These mice were just batteries in cases, not robots capable of intelligent behavior. But the misunderstanding stuck with them, and they wondered, why couldn't we hold that competition ourselves? In 1977, the announcement for IEEE's Amazing Micro Mouse Maze contest attracted over 6,000 entrants, but the number of successful competitors dwindled rapidly. Eventually, just 15 entrants reached the finals in 1979. But by this point, the contest had garnered enough public interest to be broadcast nationwide on the evening news. And just like the rumor that inspired the competition, Micromouse began to spread across the world.
Wow. Alright, give me some fucking the sickest.
ハーフサイズ競技部門で優勝してまして、去年作ったロボットからさらにブラッシュアップして作ってきたロボットで今年も連覇狙っていこうと思っています。
Even people in the top 2 or 3, you can see them trying to set their mice up and they can barely find the buttons to press because it's absolutely nerve-wracking. It doesn't matter what it was. It could be horse racing, it could be motor racing, it could be mouse racing. you have a shred of competitiveness in you, you want to win, right?
Just like a real mouse, a micromouse has to be fully autonomous. No internet connection, no GPS or remote control, and no nudging it to help it get unstuck. It has to fit all its computing, motors, sensors, and power supply in a frame no longer or wider than 25 centimeters. There isn't a limit on the height of the mouse, but the rules don't allow climbing, flight, or any forms of combustion, so rocket propulsion, for example, is out of the equation. The maze itself is a square about 3 meters on each side, subdivided by walls into corridors only 18 centimeters across. And in 2009, the half-size micromouse category was introduced, with mice smaller than 12.5 centimeters per side and paths just 9 centimeters across. The final layout of the maze is only revealed at the start of each competition, after which competitors are not allowed to change the code in their mice.
小峰さんがおっしゃっていた宇宙人枠とはこのことか。上位争いは苛烈です。
The big three competitions, All Japan, Taiwan, and USA's APEC, usually limit the time mice get in the maze to 7 or 10 minutes, and mice are only allowed 5 runs from the start to the goal.
So if you spend a lot of time searching, that's a penalty.
Makes sense. So the strategy for most micromice is to spend their first run carefully learning the maze and looking for the best path to the goal, while not wasting too much time. Then they use their remaining tries to sprint down that path for the fastest runtime possible. Solving a maze may sound simple enough, though it's important to remember that with only a few infrared sensors for eyes, the view from inside the maze is a lot less clear than what we see from above. Still, you can solve a maze with your eyes closed. If you just put one hand along one wall, you will eventually reach the end of most common mazes. And that's exactly what some initial micromouse competitors realized too. And after a simple wall-following mouse took home gold in the first finals, the goal of the maze was moved away from the edges and freestanding walls were added, which would leave a simple wall-following mouse searching forever. Your next instinct might be to run through the maze taking note of every fork in the road. Whenever you reach a dead end or a loop, you can go back to the last intersection and try a different path. If your last left turn got you nowhere, you'd come back to that intersection and go right instead. You can think of this strategy as the one a headstrong mouse might use, running as deep into the maze as it can and turning back only when it can't go any further. This search strategy, known as depth-first search, will eventually get the mouse to the goal. The problem is, it might not be the shortest route, because the mouse only turns back when it needs to, so it may have missed a shortcut that it never tried. The sibling to this search algorithm, breadth-first search, would find the shortest path. With this strategy, the mouse runs down one branch of an intersection until it reaches the next one, and then it goes back to check the path it skipped before moving on to the next layer of intersections. So the mouse checks every option it reaches, but all that backtracking means that it's rerunning paths dozens of times. At this point, even searching the whole maze often takes less time. So why not just do that? A meticulous mouse could search all 256 cells of the maze, testing every turn and corner to ensure it has definitely found the shortest path. But searching so thoroughly isn't necessary either. Instead, the most popular micromouse strategy is different from all of these techniques. It's a search algorithm known as flood fill. This mouse's plan is to make optimistic journeys through the maze. So optimistic, in fact, that on their first journey, their map of the maze doesn't have any walls at all. They simply draw the shortest path to the goal and go. When their optimistic plan inevitably hits a wall that wasn't on their map, they simply mark it down and update their new shortest path to the goal. Running, updating, always beelining for the goal. Under the hood of the algorithm, what the micromouse is marking on their map is the distance from every square in the maze to the goal. To travel optimistically, the mouse follows the trail of decreasing numbers down to 0. Whenever they hit a wall, they update the numbers on their map to reflect the new shortest distance to the goal. This strategy of following the numerical path of least resistance gives the flood fill algorithm its name. The process resembles flooding the maze with water and updating values based on the flow. Once the mouse reaches the goal, it can smooth out the path it took and get a solution to the maze. However, it may look back and imagine an even shorter, uncharted path it could have taken. The mouse might not be satisfied that it's found the shortest path just yet. While this algorithm isn't guaranteed to find the best path on first pass, it takes advantage of the fact that micromice need to return to the start to begin their next run. So if the mouse treats its return as a new journey, it can use the return trip to search the maze as well.
I think I get it.
Between these two attempts, both optimized to find the shortest path from start to finish, it's extremely likely that the mouse will discover it, and the mouse will have done it efficiently, often leaving irrelevant areas of the maze entirely untouched. Floodfill offers both an intelligent and practical way for micromice to find the shortest path through the maze.
Oh.
Once there was a clear strategy to find the shortest path, and once the microcontrollers and sensors required to implement it became common,
What the heck?
people believed Micromouse had run its course. As a paper published in IEEE put it, at the end of the 1980s, the Micromouse contest had outlived itself. The problem was solved and did not provide any new challenges. In the 2017 All Japan Micromouse competition, both the bronze and silver placing mice found the shortest path to the goal, and once they did, they were able to zip along it as quick as 7.4 seconds. But Masakazu Utsunomiya's winning mouse, Red Comet, did something entirely different. This is the shortest path to the goal, the one that everyone took. This is the path that Red Comet took. It's a full 5.5 meters longer. That's because micromice aren't actually searching for the shortest path, they're searching for the fastest path. And Red Comet's search algorithm figured out that this path had fewer turns to slow it down. So even though the path was longer, it could end up being faster. So it took that risk. It won by 131 milliseconds. Differing routes at competition are now more common than not, and even just getting to the goal remains difficult, whether due to a mysterious algorithm or a quirk of the physical maze.
The corner, it's a little bit like a whoa.
Micromice don't always behave as you'd expect.
That would have been.
Micromouse is far from solved, because it's not just a software problem or a hardware problem, it's both. It's a robotics problem. Red Comet didn't win because it had a better search algorithm or because it had faster motors. Its cleverness came from how the brains and body of the mouse interacted.
These people who make this shit is so smart.
Solving the maze is not the problem, right? It never was the problem, right? But it's
Holy
actually
cow.
about navigation, and it's about going fast.
Every year,
I legitimately, I almost can't imagine being smart enough for these events.
And there's a small group of devotees.
It's just
in
like
Japan busy building quarter-sized micromouse, which would sit on a quarter.
Nearly 50 years on, Micromouse is bigger than ever.
Hype about second.
Competitions have appeared solved at
First only, let's go.
The high jump was an Olympic sport since 1896, with competitors refining their
I used to do
jumps
that.
variations like the scissor, the
I used to be
western
really
roll,
good at the high
over
jump.
decades with diminishing returns.
Yo, what the?
But once foam padding became standard,
What the heck?
But once foam padding became standard in competition, Dick Fosbury rewrote the sport in 1968 by becoming the first Olympian to jump over the pole backwards. Now almost every high jumper does what's
Let's
known
go.
as the Fosbury flop. If Micromouse had indeed stopped in the 1980s, the competition would have missed its own Fosbury flops. Two innovations that completely changed how Micromice ran. After all, a lot can change in a sport where competitors can solder on any upgrade they can imagine.
It's a
The first
DeLorean.
flop was one of the earliest
I love
innovations
that.
in Micromouse, and had nothing to do with technology. It was simply a way of thinking outside the box, or rather, cutting through the box. Every mouse used to turn corners like this. But everything changed with the Mouse Mighty 3.
So Mighty Mouse 3.
The Mighty Mouse.
For the first time.
Mighty Mouse. Mighty Machines.
That turned out to be a much better idea than we really thought. And because it's cool, you know, maze designers often put diagonals into the maze now. So, you know, you could end up with a maze where it never comes up, but most of the time it's actually a benefit.
In order to pull off diagonals, the chassis of the mouse had to be reduced to less than 11 centimeters wide, or just 5 centimeters for half-size Micromouse. The sensors and software of the mouse had to change too. When you're running between parallel walls, all you have to do is maintain an equal distance between your left and right infrared readings.
Oh, it's about to get
But a
complicated.
diagonal requires an entirely new algorithm, one that essentially guides the mouse as if it had blinders on.
Normally, if you're going along the side of a wall or something like that, you know, most of the time you can see the wall all the time. And so that helps you to guide yourself, and you know when you're getting off. But in the diagonal situation, you just see these walls coming at you.
And if you veer even a tiny bit off course, snagging a corner is a lot less forgiving than sliding against a wall. Diagonals are still one of the biggest sources of crashes in competition today. But in exchange, a jagged path of turns transforms into one narrow straightaway.
Oh, that's hype. That's so hype.
Every competitive Micromouse is designed to take this risk. Cutting diagonals opened up room for even more ideas. Around the same time, mice were applying similar strategies to turning. Instead of stopping and pivoting through 2 right turns, a mouse could sweep around in a single U-turn motion. And once the possibility of diagonals were added,
Holy.
the total number of possible turns opened up exponentially. The maze was no longer just a grid of square hallways. With so many more options to weigh, figuring out the best path became more complex than ever. But the payoff was dramatic. What was once a series of stops and starts could now be a single fluid snaking motion. How Micromice imagined and moved through the maze had changed completely. Available technology was getting upgrades over the years as well. Tall and unwieldy arms that were used to find walls were replaced by a smaller array of infrared sensors on board the mouse. Precise stepper motors were traded in for continuous DC motors and encoders.
The DC motors give you more power for less size and weight, and so we were interested in doing that. So then you have to have a servo, you have to actually have feedback on the motor to make it do the right thing.
Gyroscopes added an extra sense of orientation. It's like a compass.
Yeah, absolutely.
You had this thing with you.
They came about because of mobile phones, really, so the technology provides people with things which weren't there before. All of the turning is done based off the gyro, rather than counting pulses off the wheels, because it's much more reliable.
But even with all the mechanical upgrades, the biggest physical issue for Micromice went unaddressed for decades. One thing you'll see almost every competitor holding is a roll of tape. Once you know to look for it, you'll see it everywhere. This tape isn't for repairs or reattaching fallen parts, it's to gather specks of dust off the wheels in between rounds. At the speed and precision these robots are operating, that tiny change in friction is enough to ruin a run. If you want to
Yo,
turn
drift out here.
fast, you need centripetal force to accelerate you into the turn.
Yo,
And the
centripetal
faster you're moving,
centripetal
the more
force. I know what
you
that
need
is.
to keep you on the track. The only centripetal force for a car
Little.
turning on flat ground is friction, which is determined by 2 things: the road pushing up the weight of the car, or the normal force, multiplied by the static coefficient of friction, which is the friction of the interface between the tire and road surface. This is why racetracks have banked turns. The steep angles help cars turn with less friction, because part of the normal force itself now points in to contribute to the centripetal force required. If the bank turn is
Totally
flat out,
understand.
cars can actually make the turn without any friction at all. The inward component of the normal force alone is enough to provide the centripetal force required to stay on track. Micromice are no different, and they don't have bank turns to help. As they got faster and faster, by the early 2000s, their limiting factor was no longer speed, but control of that speed. They had to set their center of gravity low and slow down during turns to avoid slipping into a wall or flipping over. But unlike race cars, there wasn't anything in the rules to stop Micromouse competitors from solving this problem by engineering an entirely new mechanism. Micromouse's second Fosbury flop was almost considered a gimmick when the mouse Mokomo 08 first used it in competition. You might be staring at the video to try to see it, but you won't. Instead, it's something you'll hear.
What?
That isn't the mouse revving its engines, it's spinning up a propeller. And while flying over the walls is against the rules, there's nothing in the rules against a mouse vacuuming itself to the ground to prevent slipping.
Dave Otten was the first person I saw put a fan on a mouse, but he used a ducted fan, and I think he was really looking at kind of reaction force, you know, blowing the thing down. He had a skirt around, but it was not terribly effective. Forgive me for saying so. The idea is to let as little air in as possible, and like your vacuum cleaner, when you block your vacuum cleaner, right, the motor unloads and speeds up, and so the current drops. But if you let too much air in, the current's very high, and these are just quadcopter motors, and they draw a lot of current.
At the scale of Micromouse, a vacuum fan, often just built from handheld drone parts, is enough to generate a downward force 5 times the mouse's weight.
Wow, okay. That's impressive.
So how much does the car actually weigh?
About 130 grams. And if you listen, I don't know if you'll get it on your microphone, but
oh yeah,
you'll hear the motors slow down, it loads up.
With that much friction, Micromice today can turn corners with a centripetal acceleration approaching 6 Gs. That's the same as F1 cars. Once nearly everyone equipped fans, the added control allowed builders to push the speed limit on Micromice.
When it's allowed to, it will out-accelerate a Tesla Roadster, but not for very far.
And they can zip along at up to 7 meters per second, faster than most people can run. Every one of the features now standard on the modern Micromouse was once an experiment, and the next Fosbury flop might not be far off. The first 4-wheeled Micromouse to win the All-Japan competition did so in 1988, but it would take another 22 years of the winning mouse growing and losing appendages before 4-wheeled mice became the norm. With Micromice still experimenting in 6- and 8-wheeled designs, omnidirectional movement, and even computer vision, who knows what the next paradigm shift will be.
Your time on the maze actually begins only when you leave the start square. So he's not penalized for any of this time.
But if you want to get started with Micromouse, you don't need to worry about wheel count or vacuum fans or even diagonals.
It is, to my mind, the perfect combination of all the major disciplines that you need for robotics and engineering and programming, embedded systems, all wrapped up in one accessible bundle